Well, it's always such a privilege to serve this community, partly because I get to do lovely things like Emily and Rachel's renewal of vows there, but just generally, I mean, I don't know if in your churches you used to have the service of remembering people from the persecuted church. If that was the thing you grew up with, you have somebody who would come from a country where coming out as a Christian was a dangerous place. Used to be the Iron Curtain in the old days. These days, probably China or Iran or somewhere. And the speaker would stand at the front and, tell stories of the bravery of Christians in those countries. And then at the end would come the question, if people told you were not allowed to be a Christian, would you pass the test? Is your faith strong enough? And we'd all sit there going, don't know really. But I'm not being funny, I get to stand at the front here and look at a room of people and an internet full of people who passed the test. Because pretty well everybody here has been told at some point, you can't be here, you can't worship God, you can't be a Christian, you can't do this, and you all went, forget that, I'm doing it anyway. How many pastors and ministers can say that? Like Daniel, who in exile looks back at the temple and still prays towards Jerusalem, even though he knows he's never going to go back to that place again. And he finds God with him in the new place. And amazing things happen. We took the risk to trust that if God is with us on the journey, then any transformation that God does is going to be a good one. It's going to be new creation. It's going to be water into wine. It's not going to be something that was good into something that is worthless, because that's not what our God does. And I want to be really clear today, I'm not trying to dictate what your journey should be. I'm bearing witness to mine, because for some of us, the sort of church we used to go to is no longer a safe place for us for a number of very, very good reasons. So I'm just talking about myself today, but I've got to say I'm done with the whole, are we allowed to be Christians in evangelical spaces rubbish? We're here, hello. And not only that, the queer Christians in evangelical spaces are, I think, possibly the best evangelicals. And I think also possibly that they need us, because I think in who we are as queer Christians, we possibly have the antidote to quite a lot of the problems that evangelical churches have, and Christian churches in general, but I'm speaking from my particular background. And I'm using the word queer today. I know some people find that a difficult word, but I want it specifically because it has in it not just the are you LGBT question, but also that element of disruption. You talk about things being queer, it's things that don't conform, that break the pattern. And that side of who we are as people is really important because, well, for reasons I will go into. So, if you don't come from an evangelical church, you might not know this. If you do, you might not know this. But the general definition of what is an evangelical is usually something called the Bebington Quadrilateral. And that's got 4 ideas in it. That it's about the cross, the importance of Jesus' death, the Bible as a really important thing, activism and evangelism, and the idea of conversion. Those are kind of the 4 ideological things that make evangelicalness what it is. And I think queerness has quite a lot to say to all of those areas. For example, if I could have picture number 1, the cross. Yeah? In my nan's church, we preach Christ crucified on the back wall behind the pulpit, and behind most of the sermons that I would have heard growing up and in my adult life in those kinds of churches. We believe the way to be saved is by faith in Jesus. This is what we say. But then when somebody comes out as queer in your congregation, you find out that's not actually what we mean. What we actually mean is we're saved by Jesus and being straight. Or we're saved by Jesus and presenting our gender in a certain way. We're saved by Jesus and conforming to this particular white middle class expression of what people think a Christian ought to look like. Anybody hear that? So this should be a really big warning. This is the major article of faith. This is the thing, you're saved by Jesus. If we're getting that wrong in the evangelical church, somebody should maybe notice and say something. But our presence exposes the fact that that thing is wrong. It should be an opportunity. I talked about pass the test with the persecuted church thing. I think a lot of these things are kind of, you can see them as a test, you can see them as an opportunity, a chance to look at what we're doing and go, oh, wait a minute, that doesn't match. And we got ourselves into the trap in many parts of the church of thinking that we're saved by being right. We're saved because we believe these things on this statement of belief. And then if we don't believe those things, then we're not saved. This is called salvation by works. And Paul spends most of the New Testament telling people, don't do that. Because you cannot have a faith with an intellectual component as the most important thing. Where does that leave a baby? Where does that leave somebody with a learning disability? Where does that leave an older person with Alzheimer's? If it doesn't include everybody, it doesn't work. And this should be a warning. If it doesn't include us, it doesn't work. You need to get back to being saved by Jesus. Because, I know some lovely evangelicals, particularly older people, who are really anxious the whole time. They're always worrying, do I believe, am I right? Is it okay if I do this? Will God be cross with me? And these are people who've loved God their whole lives. They should be happy, they should be relaxed, they should be at peace, and they're not. Because we've got into this thing of we have to believe the right thing or something's going to go wrong. We don't have that option in the queer bit of the church. We have to wrestle. We have to shout and rage and cry at God and say, what are you doing? And fight with God until we come to that place of peace, of knowing that we are loved and accepted for exactly who we are, because we can't just brush it under the carpet and pretend it's not there. And when we get to that place, we find that that is all God ever wanted of us, was just to be in that place of peace, of knowing that you are loved exactly as you are, because God made you exactly as you are. You cannot make God love you more. You cannot make God love you less. You are completely accepted just as you are, and that is enough. We let go of all that fear, that anxiety, that stress, that worrying about trying to believe enough to make it into heaven, because that was never what it's about. It's about grace. It's the grace of God, the love of God expressed through Jesus. And that's really at the heart of evangelicalism, yeah? But maybe we got it more than some people who think they're at the heart of evangelicalism. The other side of it is God's love shown in Jesus, and this is Jesus in a body. As Christians, I think we like ancient Greek philosophy better than we like Jesus. We like a disembodied God who's like ideologically perfect and out there in space somewhere and untouched by sin and omniscient and omnipotent and all the omni things. We don't see God so easily in a toddler who's learning to talk, or a teenager disagreeing with their parents, or an adult who experiences pain and hurt and despair and fatigue. But Jesus is all of those things, which tells us that Jesus' humanness is holy. It's the presence of God on earth. And if Jesus' humanness contains the presence of God on earth, then our humanness can contain the presence of God on earth as well. This is where God meets us, in this body here now, with these emotions, these desires, these things we experience. This is not just, it is possible to experience God in this state with these emotions. This is the only place it happens. We can't meet God anywhere else. God gave us this body, these emotions, these desires, and God will use them. We've all heard things like, don't trust your emotions, that is the flesh. Well, why did God give them to you then? Our emotions, our consciences, our sense of our personal safety, these are all gifts God has given us that we can connect with again and become whole again. And the Bible is full of stories of people who experience God in their messy, flawed, somewhat misled humanity, and God's still with them in that place. So the cross has quite a lot to say to us. And I think the queer experience of our embodiment as people being something that forces us to confront these issues it doesn't make it easier for us to get it, but we don't have so many opt-outs. We have to face it up and get through there. On the subject of the Bible, could I have my next picture, please? These optically amazing pictures, they're pictures. We've been told life works best when you follow the Maker's instructions and all of those sorts of things, but the Bible doesn't work when you treat it in that way particularly, does it? There are instructions in the Bible, most of which we ignore. There are a lot of stories in the Bible, but are those stories, some of them are pretty messed up, not being funny, there's quite a lot of dodgy behaviour. So are those stories there to copy, or are they there as cautionary tales that we should avoid? And who chooses? Now, people have dealt with that in different ways. The Bible is an amazing book that has much to teach us, and Jewish tradition tends to deal with that by hearing lots of different opinions and holding them all in tension. Christian traditions have evolved over the years with varying degrees of success. I mean, don't really go to the Crusades or the Spanish Inquisition as your prime example of how to interpret the Bible. But, we've tried different things. Evangelicalism's approach has been pretty much to present a single narrative and pretend it's the only one that ever existed. And this narrative is called What the Bible Clearly Says. You know that one? Yeah, I'm reading the room here. And they say that what the Bible clearly says is when you read through the Bible, it's obvious what it all means, and this is what you should put into practice. They don't tell you that they miss out the whole book of Leviticus, apart from the 2 verses they think are about gay people. We like most of the words of Jesus on the whole, except for the ones about money. Don't read those, because that would just be too dangerous. Psalm 139 is lovely, but we just miss out the verses about, I hate these people, God, kill them, because they don't fit what we want to happen in that nice, lovely worship song. I can't find a tune that works there. We love the stories about the underdog and the oppressed and God coming forward to help them, as long as we never, ever, ever make the connection that probably for the last couple of 100 years, we weren't the underdog, we were the oppressors. Yeah? So there's lots of these decisions that have been made by someone. I don't know who. Do you know who? But somebody made a decision at some point. Yeah, somebody made a decision at this point, or a group of people made a decision that this was going to be what the Bible clearly says. But when you don't know who that person was, I want to ask questions about that narrative. Who decided that was the narrative and not a different one? Because it's obviously being constructed. Somebody's decided what bits to put in, what bits to leave out. The Bible's actually got really good lines on constructed narratives. You wouldn't think it was because it's what the Bible clearly says. But you can tell because when you read Genesis 1, which is the story of how God created the heavens and the earth, it's followed immediately by Genesis 2, which is a different story of how God created the heavens and the earth. So right from the first 2 chapters of the Bible, you have this built-in idea that one narrative is not going to give you enough truth. One lens is not going to give you the whole story. You can see an event from this angle, but if you only see it from that angle, you risk getting stuck in the rut of the people who can only see from this angle. And from here, it might have looked completely different. We get stuck in our cultural biases. We get stuck in the things that our time and our society tell us. We get stuck in our, can't see past our own particular tunnel view. And that can sometimes be right and sometimes dangerous. Doesn't mean we're wrong, but we might be incomplete. So again, what we bring when you read the Bible as a queer person of any description, you suddenly start spotting queer people everywhere. Anybody notice that? They're like, before I came out, I was like, no, none of these people are queer. They're all perfectly straight, except, wait a minute. And you start looking and seeing all these examples because you think, oh, wait, something in me is a bit like that. I wonder if. And of course, you can't ever prove something with people in an ancient culture that interpreted things very differently. But I wonder if. Maybe for people, as we generally express gender quite differently, whether or not we identify as trans a lot of the time, you start looking at God and going, all right, if I'm made in the image of God, then wait. And then you notice in Genesis 1 that God uses they, them pronouns. And how did I not see that before? The founding myth, the origin story of evangelicalism is, John 3:16, and you must be born again, isn't it? How has a culture that's based on the origin story of you must be born again ended up with a God that is only ever allowed to use male pronouns? Who's giving birth here? And it's just not a thing you'd ever really think about, is it? So I think there's a lot that we can bring when we read the Bible. We each read it with our own lens. And that's not bad. It's not to be afraid of. If you read the Bible as a gay person, as a lesbian, as a bi person, a trans person, an intersex person, you will see it with a particular lens from your experience, your understanding of the world, your experience of God. Add into that your experience of disability or of neurodiversity or of parenthood or of race or even of trauma, although I don't think, God doesn't cause those trauma things. God would use those experiences and that understanding that you've gained, and you'll see the Bible in a different way. And that really matters, because there's a whole bunch of other people out there who also share those characteristics of you, and they need to know that lens that you have on how you see the Bible. So don't be afraid to identify where you stand. Everybody stands somewhere, whether you're Martin Luther or Martin Luther King or any of us, we all stand somewhere and we have a particular perspective that we will bring from our experience. And we as a church, the whole church, all the universal church, need your wisdom, we need your perspective, we need your lens. Because the thing is, even in evangelical churches that pretend everybody thinks the same, they don't. I don't think I know a single evangelical church that doesn't have affirming people in it. Sometimes leaders. And we definitely know that people disagree about young earth creationism, abortion, whether war should be allowed, whether hell exists, what atonement means, basically any issue you care to mention, there are people who disagree about that stuff. But the thing is, most of the time, if I disagree with you about something theological, when we're in the middle of the worship service and we've got our arms in the air singing "Shout to the Lord," nobody knows. So we present this fake image of conformity and that we are united because we are all the same and we all sing this song. And isn't it lovely to be united in the presence of the Lord? But I don't learn from that. If we can't talk about it, then I can't ever find out why you think differently from me on hell, salvation, divorce, abortion, any of these things. And if I can't find out what you think about it, I can't learn, I can't grow. How does that help me? How does that help you? We're not that easy. When I stand next to somebody in the worship service with my partner, or when you stand next to somebody in the worship service and you're presenting your gender in a way that is very different to what they expect, you can't just brush that under the carpet and pretend it's not there. Our physical presence in the room is a provocation, it's a disruption. It means people have to talk about things. And churches go, no! But it's another of those opportunity test moments, isn't it? Because if you said yes, you said, oh, tell me about that. We might learn, we might grow, we might get better, we might get wiser, we might get more mature, whatever you end up thinking. And it's an opportunity there to go, oh, wait a minute, I can see you have a different lens on this. Tell me about that. And we'd get stronger. So our presence should be a catalyst for so much growth and so much change in the church, which doesn't mean you should stay in a church that's treating you like rubbish. Don't do that. Get out, keep yourself safe. But it's the opportunity our presence provides that should help churches to grow, should help churches to be better and to be stronger, to be more broad-minded, to be more open-hearted, to properly take the Bible seriously. Because all the way through the Bible, every single important event, you've got multiple accounts of the story. Jesus' whole life, you've got 4. The whole of the history of Israel and Judah, you've got 2. Throughout Genesis, you've got different authors putting things in, edited together to make one narrative, but it's written by different people because it matters. We need those different lenses, we need those different perspectives to get the biggest possible understanding of the truth. Not that we'll ever get it all. Sadly, most churches don't cope with that very well because, again, they're scared. It's back to this thing of, if we don't believe the right things, we go to hell. Or actually, we lose members, we lose money. We lose reputation, we lose influence, we lose power, we lose security. It's genuinely hard when your livelihood, your job, your family depends on that. I'm not underestimating that for a minute. But if it's a fear-led reaction, it may be worth questioning, because I don't think God leads us into a place of fear. What often happens, of course, is that then we get pushed to the margins because the provocation is too annoying, it's too difficult, it's too scary. So we end up outside of those zones. And if we could switch to the next slide, please. That can be a source of offence. I think it was to me at first. I felt my loss of privilege. I wouldn't say I was the most privileged person in the world, but, I had a ministry, I had a community, I was part of a church, I felt important, I felt valued, and then suddenly all of that was taken away. And, I felt the loss of that. That was a bereavement. And I know a lot of us have experienced that, and I'm not going to underplay it. But the thing is, it's this thing about finding where God is already. And I thought I was being cast out of the place where God was. That wasn't the truth. I spent a lot of time, over the decades in planning missions, whether that's door-to-door knocking or an alpha course or organise an event with a speaker or, street theatre and trying to get really on the cutting edge in 1987, I suppose, but doing all these different things to try and get people to come into a church. None of them really work very well, I've got to say. But when you march in Pride with us, and you walk down Piccadilly and you can see people breaking down in tears and running forward to ask one of the vicars to bless their marriages, and you can just see on people's faces the sudden revelation. We're not introducing them to God at that moment. God's already there. God's already been working in their hearts and their minds and their marriages and their relationships for months, years, decades. Or seeing us in that march just gave them permission to say so and to say it in public. Because people have been feeling inside, my relationship's great. I wish we could get a blessing on it. Because, this is important to me. I want to show God that this matters. And then suddenly they had an opportunity to do it. But we didn't make them think that. They already thought it because God was already at work. When you're at Black Pride, I didn't go because I had another event, but we sent a team. And on the hour, every hour, they're starting a worship and prayer meeting. And every hour, more and more people are coming to join the worship and prayer meeting at the Black Pride stall. That's not us making something happen. That's people who were already in that place of wanting to worship and wanting to pray, wanting to be part of a community. And on the hour, every hour, they got to come and join that group at the Black Pride stall and experience the presence of God in the middle of that event. They weren't going to come to my church. Last night I went to the Globe. If you haven't seen this yet, you've got about 2 weeks left. It's called I, Joan. It's a play about Joan of Arc, and this is how it starts. This is written by a playwright who told The Guardian that they are a non-religious person, writing a play for a non-religious audience. And this is how it starts. Trans people are sacred. Elevating our humanity, finding the unity hidden inside community, remembering our collective connectivity fuels courageous creativity, unlocking the blessed spiritually that we all seek. Yeah, this is about to get spiritual. Setting aside all religiosity, we'll focus instead on more of a street God, if you will, a God for the queers and the drunks and the beautiful fuck-ups, a God for the godless, a God for you, if you want, tonight. Because tonight is a celebration, is a holy communion for saints and sinners and everyone in between. We offer you restitution. We offer you revolution. We offer you love. I'm here to share my story, to receive God, and to offer you love. And this whole story, this is exactly. And the whole place erupts into cheers at that point. Okay? This is not a church service. This is an actor on the stage of the Globe reading the words of a non-religious person who claims no claim to faith at all, but has somehow discovered something about God at work outside of the church, amongst the people who the church has rejected, amongst the people who hate religion and anything to do with it. And they give that speech on the stage, and there is an instant response from the crowd going, yes, we know that. We experienced that. That's the idea of God that we can identify with, that we can connect with. God is at work. And yeah, I'm not saying God's not at work in churches. God's at work in churches because people who are in churches love God. But God's a lot more at work in some other places. Because where churches are places of power and security, just mentally run through your Bible for a second. How many times do you find Jesus in places of power and security? Yeah, me neither. Revivals always come on the margins. Revivals come in the socially excluded, the racially mixed groups and times and places where that's not allowed, the minors, the travellers, the prisoners, the people who aren't part of the power security structures. So all that time I was in churches genuinely crying out to God for a move of God to change the world. Maybe I was asking for the wrong thing. Prophesying a move of God is all very well, but it's already happening. And we didn't ask to get forced out of churches. It was no fun. It was really painful. But it did force us out of the places of power and security where God is restricted into the places of freedom and liberty and transformation where God is already working. So have our eyes open. Let's see what God's doing. We need to be a bit like Paul in, when Paul finds the statue to an unknown God. And, obviously he said, oh, right, yes, you know about this God. Now let me tell you what that God's name is. Let me tell you what that God's done. Let me tell you about Jesus. And put words on those experiences that people are already understanding, that they're already connecting with. They already have this idea of a God who loves them, a God who's setting them free, a God who's transforming them. And, yeah, maybe we could get involved and tell people about some ways that that have worked for people in the past to help you develop that connection with God and to find that place of love and acceptance. Because, church in general, evangelicalism in particular, is quite troubled by marginalisation. Out of a really good intention to set people free from oppression and poverty, what it ends up is we want people to look normal in a very kind of middle class way. And the idea that God's best for someone might be that queer people stay queer and disabled people stay disabled, and people of various ethnic origins express their culture in a way that does not all go together into a nice, everybody's the same melting pot. It's quite offensive to a lot of people. The idea that poor people might stay poor, that rich people might become poor for the sake of the gospel. We have this addiction to power, to the big and the shiny and the loud and the clever. We think that if we could just control the government, if we could just control the education system, if we could just control all these things, then people would come to Jesus. Jesus already came to them. We don't have to make people come to Jesus. Jesus is already at work. And our job maybe is to get into those places and prophesy back to the church and say, hey, folks, he's over here, she's over here, they're over here. Come and find it. Come and get involved. And to prophesy to the world as well, because if you're stuck on the margins with people, it's very hard not to notice the injustices that are being perpetrated. And again, it's not possible to be brought up on stories of David and Goliath and Daniel in the lion's den and the Hebrew midwives who saved all the babies from Pharaoh by just not doing what they were told. And, if we're brought up on that stuff, you're not going to really be able to say, oh, just calm down and leave it alone. You're too small to make a difference. That's not the narrative we were brought up with. This bit of the evangelical narrative, I'm claiming back and saying, yes, we fight injustice. We stand up against oppression. We stand up against those principalities and powers that say you are not allowed to be the person God created you to be, because that is the work of the devil and this is the work of God. So the fourth element of evangelicalism is the conversion narrative. Now, I don't know, I used to kind of take the mickey out the Soul Survivor kids, the ones who would go every year and become a Christian at least 3 times every conference, just to be on the safe side. Like, once saved, always saved, come on. But I don't know, maybe I was judgy. I think perhaps we all need a recurring series of come to Jesus moments. When I repented of my life of sin and crime when at the age of 6 or 7, I really genuinely meant it. And I've never gone back on it. It was a really important, sincere moment. But when I was 6 or 7, I knew nothing. And as I've grown up as a person, I've had to go, oh, wait a minute, I didn't know about that. How does that fit with my faith? And then realise I've got into certain ruts of thinking and doing things. And I've had to change my mind. I've had to go back to God. So although I have a conversion moment, I've also had a lot of conversion moments. Definitely had a moment where I had to repent of my homophobia. Definitely had a moment where I had to repent because I looked at what God was doing in the queer communities and kind of thought, I don't know about that. Is that safe? A bit dodgy. Not sure. And I was despising the work of the Holy Spirit. That was not good. And again, if we believe in the born-again narrative, which is a good metaphor, maybe it's worth praying and saying, okay, God, our loving mother, what's the aspect of compassion or justice or wisdom or forgiveness that you're trying to give birth to in me today? Because I'm not the finished article yet. And maybe being born again happens in stages. Maybe there's a bit of us that comes through at different times. And what is it that you're trying to do today in us? So, having a bit of a Marie Kondo moment with my faith. You look back on things, and I don't know if you're familiar with the Netflix series, but her basic idea of how to declutter your house is that you get everything out and you look at it and you say, I love this thing. It's brilliant. I want to keep it, and you keep it. Something else you might go, I don't know why I have that anyway, and throw it away. Other things you go, do you know, I used to love this. This is so important to me. Maybe your childhood teddy bear or something like that. And you're like, it's great. We really don't need it anymore. And that's okay. And I wonder whether there's sometimes elements of our spiritual life that we need to go, that was so important to me. That sense of being certain, of being right about everything, about being on the in crowd, that was so important to me for such a long time. I really enjoyed that. Thank you. And then you let it go. Because that's not right anymore. new time, new things. So it's okay, I think, to look back on your tradition and go, all right, these are the things that are brilliant and I'm keeping them. These are the things that, no. And these are the things that, there was a time and a place where that was so important and that was great. And now I'm letting that one go. So if my water to wine journey has turned me into a fine oaky Merlot, remember yours doesn't have to be like mine. Maybe you'll get turned into a nice fizzy Prosecco instead. Or a nicely aged single malt whiskey. Maybe your encounter with church was more like a night of solid Jaeger bombs, and what you actually need is a nice long drink of cool, clear water. God knows. So while my journey has looked back, actually, I'm looking back at my evangelicalism and going, this is mine. This stuff is good. We can do it better. We can do it right. And my queerness will help me do it better. Your journey won't necessarily look like that. But whatever God transforms you into will be good. So it might be worth just taking a few minutes to sit with that and go, okay, God, what transforming are you doing here? If you're at that stage where everything is just lying around you on the floor and you're like, my entire life is in pieces, it'll be okay. Keep going, keep pushing through. Because if we keep going in that attitude of honesty and authenticity and trust, the truth will in the end set us free. Even though there are moments where it looks like your entire life is in pieces on the floor around you. That's okay, don't worry, it will pass. I haven't used the Bible very much today, as in I haven't read a passage and worked out of it, but I hope you can see there's a lot of Bible in it, because it's more about the way you approach it. Because you can take a verse out of the Bible and use it to batter anybody, we all know that. But it's about thinking, okay, why am I doing this the way I'm doing it? Is that okay? We think the Bible's so important, we want to do it right. And me taking one verse out of that and bashing you on the head with it isn't going to make you do that. It's more about thinking about the reasons why. So can we take a minute maybe just to sit with that thought? Perhaps Peter, you could give us a little tinkle. And just spend some time thinking about what it is out of our past. Where were we on our journey of transformation with God? What is it that God's turning you into? Are there things we need to let go of? Are there things we need to reclaim and pick back up and go, yeah, that matters. Salvation by grace, that's the thing I need right now. Permission to look at the Bible again and go, actually, the way I read that is really important. Somebody else might need to hear that. Who is it we come into contact with in our daily life that you can see where God is working? Or maybe ask God to open your eyes that we can start to see that we become agents of transformation in the world for other people. Or is God talking to you about, you need to have a come to Jesus moment about something? So we'll just take a couple of minutes.